It might be a day late, but I've got some good news. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 11 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2023 CFL season. And you might have noticed it from the thumbnail. How many fingers did I have held up? 8 and 4 in week 10. And it feels so satisfying to have another very strong week for the first time in, I don't even remember how long it's been. But 8 and 4 is exceptionally satisfying after the struggles that we have had around here this season. And that 8 and 4 includes a clean sweep across the board, 4-0 straight up, and 3-1 against the spread. One of my stronger against the spread weeks this season as well. Obviously, you know what the totals did. The totals did not do very well if I was overall 8 and 4. But look, 4-0 straight up, 3-1 against the spread. As I've said about some bad teams this year, the underlying numbers are there. We might be starting to turn a corner here, and I could not be more excited about it. Now, CFL Fantasy last week, unfortunately, I, like 25.1% of CFL Fantasy players in Week 10, got bit by the Collaros injury bug. Yeah, that's right. 1 in 4 fantasy players in CFL Fantasy had Zach Collaros as their starting quarterback last week. I was unfortunately one of them. He gets injured. He puts up, I think, -4 if he was your captain, and that's something that I would love to see the CFL fantasy game develop and bring in. Like, you can see the percentage of managers who have selected a particular player. I would like to also see the percentage of managers who selected that player as their captain. That was, of course, the position that I was in. Collaros was my captain, but I would like to see that percentage as well. So it was like 25.1% chose Collaros on their roster, but that could mean 15%, 17%, 20% of players might have chosen him as their captain, which makes that even worse. That's something that I'd like to see in the future. Despite the Collaros injury, I still brought in what I thought was a fairly respectable 71.9 points, given that my quarterback put up -4. Now, it was still outside the top 6,000 overall and outside the top 350 in Derek Taylor's league, but again, considering what happened, I'm all right with it. 908.6 points on the season for me in fantasy has me just inside the top 900 overall and at exactly number 140 in Derek Taylor's league. Despite the injury, I did have a most outstanding player, of course, in week 10, and that was Toronto Argos running back AJ Ouellette, putting up 90 yards on 14 carries and really giving me the value by catching a 12-yard touchdown pass. Good for 17.2 fantasy points. AJ O, my MOP. Since it's Wednesday when we're doing this show, I'm actually going to be able to give you my actual fantasy roster as it sits right now. I may make some changes to it between now and tomorrow, but let's get into our 4-game slate for Week 11. It has the Edmonton Elks in Hamilton taking on the Ticats, who are coming in off of their bye. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers hit the road for a second straight week as they travel to Calgary to take on the Stamps. Montreal is in Ottawa Alouettes at REDBLACKS, and the BC Lions travel to Saskatchewan to take on, we don't know who at quarterback, but we do know that they'll be wearing a Riders jersey. In terms of league-wide trends, boy, points aplenty last week. 241 total points scored in Week 10. The over profited big time. The over has, in fact, hit 5 straight and 6 of the last 8 overall, dating back through the games in Week 9. And it was a tale of 2 quarterback stories in the games last week. It was either backups getting an opportunity to shine in Drew Brown and Caleb Evans, or dominant injury returns for incumbent starting quarterbacks with Vernon Adams and swag Chad Kelly. But let's go ahead and dive into our Week 11 slate. Let's start with that Edmonton-Hamilton game, of course, game taking place at Tim Hortons Field, and a nearly inconceivable for the Elks this season 2-possession lead at halftime over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers gives way to an absolutely brutal 28-7 second half run against, allowed to backup quarterback Drew Brown after the Collaros injury, and we have plenty of tension between Chris Jones and his new starting quarterback, Trey Ford. Speaking of, I thought Ford had himself an excellent first start. Well, maybe not excellent, but it was a good game for him. 75% on his completion, so very high efficiency there. 239 all-purpose yards for him. He had a touchdown pass, did throw an interception, but also added a rushing touchdown. So as far as I'm concerned, that interception he kind of made up for. And we got 98 yards on just 10 carries and a rush touchdown by Kevin Brown. The offense had some things going. They had every opportunity here to pull a massive upset, and yet the secondary goes out and does that, allowing 313 passing yards and 4 touchdowns in that game. All 4 of those touchdowns coming to Drew Brown. It is new and miraculous ways to lose football games. And as we mentioned, seeing a little tension maybe in the sidelines there for the Edmonton Elks. Trey Ford after the game kind of, I thought, fairly lightly criticized the conservative second half play calling, like the Elks were just trying to sit on the lead and nurse it to a win. Head coach Chris Jones retorts, which you never like to hear, but retorts with execute and stay in our lanes. Creator's note to Chris Jones, Trey Ford's lane is trying to win football games. You might want to try it sometime. And look, maybe this is overblowing the whole thing, but coach versus quarterback is not exactly a winning formula. And I think maybe you saw some of the repercussions of that with the Elks and team president Victor Cooey deciding to part ways. In Hamilton, like I mentioned, the Ticats enter this game off the bye after dropping a 2-possession decision against Montreal in Week 9, a game that saw yet another bad second-half blow-up as the Ticats get outscored 24-3, including an 18-0 run against them in the fourth quarter. We talked about that when we talked about Montreal last week. A quarterback, my kingdom for a quarterback. Wherefore art thou quarterback? That has to be what Ticats fans are thinking right now. Ticats quarterbacks this season have combined to throw for just 2,125 yards. So that's, in 8 games, that's 250 yards, a little more than that. So on average, which is not terrible, they've only thrown 6 majors, and they've thrown 15 interceptions. And look, yes, McLeod Bethel Thompson, Bo Levi Mitchell has not been good. 9 of those interceptions belong to him. But every Ticats quarterback has thrown at least 3. Matthew Schiltz has been far and away the best starting quarterback for the Hamilton Ticats this year, and that's not by design. If that was going to be the result, 2,100 yards, 6 touchdowns, 15 picks. Dane Evans could have stuck around and done that. Correction, Dane Evans could have stuck around and done better than that. It's been very rare this season to have a game where the Ticats win or tie in the turnover battle. This game was 3-3 in terms of the turnovers. Neither one of these teams decided that they wanted to win, really, in this game. But the defense may not even be capable of winning with that context, despite the fact that their results lately have been at least a bit more efficient. So what do I do here? How do I go in this battle of the 2 head coaches in this league that I think I trust the least? Orlando Steinhauer and Chris Jones. I think I go with the better quarterback on the team that feels more capable of competing in a track meet, i.e., putting a lot of points on the board. That team plays in Edmonton. Now, this would buck a trend. There's been a trend in the CFL this season. Teams coming off the bye are 9-2 straight up. That's pretty solid. And I understand that picking against the Ticats would be bucking what is a fairly strong trend. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what your boy is going to do. I am grabbing the upset here. I am taking the Edmonton Elks on the road in Hamilton. I don't trust the quarterback situation. I don't trust the coach. And at the very least on Edmonton's side, I feel like they might have a guy at quarterback. So give me the Edmonton Elks in the upset on the road in Hamilton. Edmonton beats the Ticats. On the line, the Ticats come into this game as 5.5-point favorites. I can't remember what this line opened at. I feel like it might have been 4. So I think there is money coming in on the Ticats here, or money coming in against Edmonton, I should say. I'm more than happy to take those 5.5 points. I think with the upside here of the Ticats offense, I think laying 5.5 points on them against almost anybody is a bad idea. And clearly I think it's a bad idea here because I don't even think they're going to win the game. Yes, they've got James Butler, but Kevin Brown's on the other side, and Hamilton's run defense almost as bad as Edmonton. So give me the plus 5.5 either way on the Elks. Total in this game set at 45.5 points, and this is a tough one for me because while I don't like the offensive upside of either team, I really don't like the defense of either team. This is a tough one for me because I have it picked a particular way. I think the trend of the league is over right now. Let's go over on this point total. It's not. I originally was going to go under on this. Let's go over on this point total, over 45.5 between Edmonton and Hamilton. Let's go Elks. Let's go Elks 26, Hamilton 20. So that like barely gets over the 45.5. I feel like we're going to get half pointed on this number one way or the other, but let's go with the half point to the over. Let's go 26-20 Edmonton. Elks win the game outright and give me the plus 5.5 on Edmonton. Let's go to Calgary now, where Winnipeg is in town, and on the Bomber side, again, they survive that David versus Goliath scare that I talked about last week, despite losing Zach Collaros to that injury, as Drew Brown steps in, tossing 4 touchdown passes in a big comeback win. Now, Zach Collaros is not currently practicing, did not practice yesterday, did not practice Monday. I would be shocked if he plays in this game. I figure it'll be another start for Drew Brown. But look, he came in, he threw 71%, so he was accurate. 307 yards passing, nothing wrong with that. 4 touchdown passes. And to kind of focus on Brown for a second here, I think we think of him as such an inexperienced player because he's only been in the league for a few years. But that was his 16th CFL game. Now, granted, some of them has just been like, short yardage carries here and there, but he's packed 16 games where he's played into 3 seasons. So yes, he's somewhat inexperienced, but he's also not a rookie, and he definitely turned some heads last week. And I genuinely think the Bombers can afford patience here. They're in a really good position in the playoff race. They play a very punishing style that I think affords them the patience with an injury like the one to Collaros. You can put Drew Brown in there, and the way Winnipeg plays the game, possess the football, don't take penalties, spread the wealth, run the ball down their throats with Brady Oliveira, they can afford to say, like, we probably don't need to rush Collaros back from injury. You might see them treat Collaros the same way the Lions treated Vernon Adams, which is give the backup quarterback a pair of starts. Doesn't matter who they're playing. They're in a good position. Give him a pair of starts. Let your incumbent starter get healthy. That's what I imagine we're going to see here. We move to Calgary now, and oof maroon, the Stamps get fustigated by 4 scores in BC as the pass game gets absolutely smothered by a bounce-back Lions secondary, coupled with a wild lack of discipline for the Stamps, 11 penalties for 130 yards. Speaking of yards, I have another number for you, 131. That was the number of scoreless passing yards for Jake Maier, as the Stamps are held to just a trio of Rene Paredes field goals, and even a returning Kadeem Carey, who touched the ball 9 times, turned those into 58 all-purpose yards, couldn't keep that recent efficiency streak going for the Stampeders. We've talked about it. They've been a very efficient offense in the last 4 games or so. I would have expected their score based on their efficiency in those games to be around 15-16. Still not enough to win, but certainly more than what they showed, which was just 9. And for the Stamps, trailing by 17 points after the first quarter, this game was a perfect storm of bad defense, having very little for a top offense with a returning quarterback. And to be shut out in the fourth quarter, you're trailing a game by, at that time, they're trailing the game by 18. So the conditions at the end of the first quarter were basically the same as they were in the fourth. To be shut out in the fourth quarter, trailing that much, where basically your only game plan is screw it, throw the ball down the field, to be shut out in that context, it almost feels inexcusable for the Stamps. Once again, even expecting a start here from Drew Brown, I'm finding very little reason to have much faith in what the Stampeders are doing right now, how they're playing right now. They should be better. They aren't. The fact that Kadeem Carey is back is good. I'm sure they continue ramping him back up into his normal workload, but I see no reason here to think that they beat the Bombers. The Bombers have completely turned a corner. They look like the team that they've been over the last couple of years. I just don't see anything here. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see it. Give me the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on the road for the second week in a row, this time in Calgary. Winnipeg gets the win over the Stamps. Now on the line, Calgary is taking +7 here as a home dog. We've talked about road favorites. They've hit very strongly in the CFL this year. I think that trend continues. Give me the -7 on the Bombers. It's just a touchdown. The Bombers are far and away good enough to cover that number. So give me the -7 on Winnipeg. Total in the game set at 47.5. I think this is a high-scoring game because, again, the Bombers' defense, scoring-wise, has not been the same as it's been in years past. And even we saw it, last week they spotted the Elks the first 22 points of the game. So let's take the over here. I think this game fairly comfortably gets into the 50s. Over 47.5 in Winnipeg, Calgary. Let's go Bombers 34, Stamps 23. Bombers win. Bombers cover the -7 and give me the over on the points. Halfway home in the Week 11 show, and that means, as it always does, it is time to shout out my great friends and sponsors at Nerd Tees. Ladies and gentlemen, even as it gets a little darker and grayer and cloudier outside, which I'm sure you can see, it is always nice and bright and sunny when you got Nerd Tees in your life. Nerdtees.ca is where you need to go to find dozens and dozens of incredible loose leaf tea, estate coffee, and flavored coffee blends. Anything for any palate. You can find it at nerdtees.ca, including one of my old favorites, which is Golden Apple Cinnamon. That is what I am sipping on today. You can be sipping on that and any of a bunch of incredible options if you go to nerdtees.ca and use my promo code, which is BWFinest. You're going to save 15% by using that promo code. You're also going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $100, which is excellent value. And if you're one of my viewers in the US, you get a great conversion rate right now on the US dollar. Nerdtees.ca, promo code is BWFinest, save your 15%, get your free shipping, find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Off to the nation's capital we go as the Montreal Alouettes travel to Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS. And for the Alouettes, they cruised to a dominant win last week over the Riders behind a 3-touchdown performance from Caleb Evans in a spot start for an injured Cody Fajardo. I believe Fajardo took the warm-ups, wasn't ready to go. But rack up another huge ground game for the Montreal Alouettes. 33 carries for 186 yards and not one, not two, but 3 rushing touchdowns. That's the kind of finishing power that the Alouettes have lacked all season long. They brought it out in that game. Caleb Evans is a weapon. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game, and that was without William Stanback. He did not play. Walter Fletcher got the start. Jeshrin Antwi got into the run game. Just a massive performance there. And the Alouettes in their last 3 games, 82 carries, 440 yards in their last 3 games. What is that? That's it's almost 150 yards a game. So they're committed to the run. They're getting a lot of results. 4 rushing touchdowns in that span, all wins. And I have somewhat maligned the Owls defensively lately. They did get the benefit of a third-string quarterback for a good portion of this game after Mason Fine got hurt and Jake Dolegala had to come in, but they were highly, highly efficient. 20.3 yards against per point against. The bigger the number there, the better. They had an excellent performance, and they created turnovers. They generated an interception. They recovered a fumble. I believe it was Jake Dolegala's fumble. So the defense did everything right, and it was a nice turnaround performance for them. For the Red Blacks, based on their performance, they probably deserved better, but they got swagged on as a returning Chad Kelly dropped 44 points on, again, I've talked about an ever-weakening Red Blacks defense, at least from an efficiency perspective. We definitely saw that last week, and it did ruin a nice bounce-back performance from Dustin Crum, who had a couple of down showings. He was 81% for 292 through the air. Man, you can throw on that Argos defense, but it's just tough to beat them. It's tough to beat them when they play their game. 3 touchdown passes for Dustin Crum, no picks, added 42 more yards on 9 carries. In Crum's last 2 games, 80%, 466 through the air, those 3 touchdowns, 13 and 63 rushing. So he's turned a corner again after a couple of down performances, which is nice. And it's nice to see him developing as a pocket passing quarterback. Just 1 interception in his last 4 games for Dustin Crum, and that complements his obviously incredible running ability. 7.9 yards per carry on average this year, adding a trio of rush touchdowns. And again, I hate to keep crapping on the defense, but despite the fact that the Red Blacks gave up 5 quarterback sacks, so the O-line play was not there for Ottawa in this game, but even despite that, the game was still within reach. This was not a complete absolute blowout of a game. It was a couple of possessions, and if the defense had had anything for them at all, the story here could have been a little bit different. But they gave up 544 total yards in that game. They did not sack Chad Kelly 1 time, and despite giving up all that yardage, their efficiency was still 12.4. Only 12.4 yards required for every Argo point that went on the board. That's not going to be good enough, and it was not good enough against a team like Toronto. We talked about it, I think, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it might have even been last week. The Red Blacks have yet to beat a team in the East. I don't expect Ottawa's going to stay winless against the East Division all season long. If they do, then they're obviously in trouble. But in those games, their average margin of victory is -8. So it's a full possession, a fully 2-point converted touchdown. That's their average margin of victory, -8. In those games. That gives me very little reason to kind of try to sniff an upset here against an Alouettes team that's streaking. The Alouettes have figured out what works for them, and they're going to do it, and they're going to make you stop them. And if you can't, it's going to be a long day for you. I think, unfortunately, it's probably going to be a long day for the Red Blacks in this one. We are going to go ahead and grab the streaking Montreal Alouettes to get their 4th consecutive win, really making some noise in the East Division. Montreal on the road in Ottawa beats the Red Blacks. Now on the line, the Red Blacks are taking +2.5 here as a marginal home dog. I like Montreal to win. It's a fairly small price to pay, so let's lay the -2.5 on the Alouettes. Total in this game set at 47 points. I do think this goes over. Again, I really don't trust Ottawa's defense to keep a game under right now. But I think based on these 2 offenses, I think this game is very competitive. We could see an overtime game here. That's at all entirely possible between these 2 teams. And in that case, the over is basically a slam dunk. We've talked about it a bunch this season. So give me the over on that 47-point total. I'm going to go 27-23 Alouettes. Montreal wins, Montreal covers, and give me the over on the point total. And the last game we're going to look at takes place at Mosaic Stadium in Saskatchewan as the BC Lions travel to Saskatchewan to take on the Riders. Last week, of course, we saw the return of big play VA, Vernon Adams returning to the BC Lions lineup, and he did so in triumphant fashion, throwing 322 yards and 4 touchdowns as the Lions trample the Stamps by 4 touchdowns, 37-9. And I talked about it. I said, look, after getting absolutely decimated by Winnipeg, this defense is going to be angry. The BC Lions defense played angry in this game. They were looking for that bounce back performance. That is exactly what they got. They gave up a 50-piece and 576 yards to the Bombers. They pitched a 9-point, 208 total yard gem with a pair of turnovers. It's a shame that the Stamps had to get punished for what the Bombers did to the Lions. Lions didn't have much going on the ground, only 50 yards on 14 carries. Now, Taquan Mazel did add a receiving touchdown, so that kind of saved his fantasy day for me, which was nice. And in the absence of Dominique Rhymes, Keon Hatcher dominates this game. 9 catches for $170 and a touchdown. Also had 4 different touchdown receivers, obviously Hatcher and Mazel, but you also had touchdown receptions to Alex Hollins and Lucky Whitehead. The ball was spread around even without the biggest target there, and big-time success for this Lions team. On Saskatchewan's side, they had absolutely no answers for a listless 29-point drubbing at the hands of Caleb Evans and the Alouettes, also potentially losing their second starting quarterback this season as Mason Fine goes down with what I believe was a hamstring injury. So anything soft tissue, assume 2 to 3 weeks. So Jake Dolegala enters the game with more than half of it remaining. Riders quarterbacks combining to just go 55% for 127 scoreless passing yards. Now Dolegala did at least have a rush touchdown, but it did come in garbage time. I think the biggest problem for the Riders defensively is they're not getting pressure on the quarterback. They only got 1 sack in this game. They only have 20 on the season, and that's in 9 games. So that's barely above 2 a game. So they're not getting the defensive pressure that's been a hallmark of their defense over the last few years. And the defense is struggling to make stops without getting that pressure. Montreal was 60% on second down in that game. I believe they went 12 for 20. And they were 3 for 3 in the red zone. If it got to the red zone, it was going to be 7 points on the board for the Alouettes. The Riders could not get the defensive stops that they needed, and there's not much that can overcome the league's worst turnover ratio of -10. And think about that for a second. They've played 9 games. The turnover ratio is -10. They're averaging losing the turnover ratio in every game this season. Whether it is Mason Fine at less than 100%, or whether it's Jake Dolegala, or whether it's the newly acquired Antonio Pipkin. They just made a trade with Hamilton to bring Antonio Pipkin in. Expect, I think, a repeat performance of the defensive dominance and offensive output of the BC Lions that we saw from them last week. I expect the Lions to roll in this game. Gimme BC on the road in Saskatchewan to beat the Riders. This line opened much nicer than it currently is, and I do wish that I had gotten this episode done in enough time to grab that line. I think it opened around like -6.5, -7, something like that. It's currently up to -9.5 for the BC Lions, so it's almost double digits, but I still feel confident in them covering this number. So let's grab the BC Lions -9.5. Obviously, the Riders taking +9.5 as a large home underdog. Total in this game set at 45 points, and I think this is the one under of this week. I just don't expect much from the Riders on the offensive side, and BC doesn't have to blow the Riders out of the water to win this game, so I just don't expect that from them either. This may be another good opportunity to rest Dominique Rhymes. You don't really need him for this game with all the other receiving options you have for BC, so give me the under in this one. Let's go BC 28, Saskatchewan. Let's give them double digits. Let's go 10. So Lions win, Lions cover the -9.5, and give me the under on the points. There you go, folks. Those are your picks for Week 11 in the CFL. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the Edmonton Elks upsetting the Hamilton Ticats 26-20. So give me the +5.5 on Edmonton in a game that goes over barely the 45.5 point total. I got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers beating the Calgary Stampeders 34-23. So give me the Bombers straight up. Give me the Bombers -7 against the spread. And give me the over on the 47.5 point total. I got the Montreal Alouettes going to Ottawa and beating the REDBLACKS in a tight competitive game 27-23. I'm going to lay the -2.5 on Montreal in a game that goes over 47 points. And I got the BC Lions in Saskatchewan handing another big loss to the Riders by a score of 28-10. So give me the Lions to win straight up, obviously. Give me the Lions -9.5, and I'll take under on the 45 point total. So now you know what I think is going to happen. What do I think is going to happen in fantasy? My Week 11 fantasy roster is right in front of your eyes right now, and very clearly, I'm trying to find out what Brown can do for me. I'm going to roll Drew Brown as my starting quarterback. I assume he's going to be getting the start. It was basically between any of the lower cost options, either Drew Brown, Trey Ford, or Dustin Crum. So I decided to go with Drew Brown. He was the least expensive of the three of them, believe it or not. So we're going to go with him in a very advantageous spot, I think, against that Stamps defense. Running back, we're going big. We're taking the two top running backs against the two worst run defenses in the CFL, James Butler and Kevin Brown. So yes, we are investing quite a bit of money in the running back position. At wide receiver, Keon Hatcher has been doing huge things for the Lions basically all season long. Even if Dominique Rhymes does play, Keon Hatcher has carved out a nice rapport with Vernon Adams. And Kenny Lawler, I just wanted to grab somebody from that Bombers receiving core to stack with Drew Brown. Kenny Lawler feels like as good an option as anybody else. Stearns is one of the biggest value plays in CFL fantasy right now. The last 2 weeks, he's only cost minimum money at $2,500. He's up to $4,500. He has a role behind the big guys, and the big guys get all the attention, but the last couple of weeks, Stearns has carved out a nice role and a couple of solid hitting above projections. So we saved some money there, but with a player who has a carved out role in his offense. So I like that. And on defense, minimum money. I'm taking the Elks to win. Let's take them on defense and see if they can do something. Those Ticats quarterbacks love to throw up interceptions. Week 11 show is in the books for you now, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time to come watch it. A belated Wednesday edition of the CFL Pick Show. I do want to ask you a question before we get out of here. I'm trying to figure out my scheduling going forward because the NFL is just around the corner. My NFL live streams will be returning, and they'll be returning Tuesday evenings. I'm going to try as hard as I can to keep them Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern. The question then becomes, where would you like the CFL show? Would you like the CFL show in this spot, which is like early on Wednesdays, basically 2 days before the games begin for that week? Or would you like the CFL show on Monday to get the CFL show out ahead of the NFL live stream, have all that time right at the end of the previous week? Would you like Mondays? Would you like Wednesdays? Let me know in the comments section below. I also have a poll up on my Twitter account, so please go to my Twitter account and vote in the poll. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees. We will see you again for week number 12.